making sense?
Yes,
okay. So Reza, we are together again.
Yes, we are.
What do you want to talk about today?
All right, so today we're going to talk about kind of your overarching career and the lessons that you've learned throughout. We got started talking about The World's Most Dangerous Places, the book that you wrote, and today I just kind of want to go over the lessons that you've learned from the book. We've deep dived into the book, and now I kind of just have some overarching questions for you.
With the caveat, the book is just one of the many books I've written, so it
exactly.
My life isn't the book, and the book isn't my life. It's just one thing. But yes, it's enough of a generic concept, right?
Yes.
Guy goes to world's most dangerous places. Why is he still alive, right?
Yeah, and I think people are curious about overall lessons and maybe some wisdom you can instill on the rest of us.
Well, I would like to start by saying that there's a lot of negativity associated with people who seek out danger, right? Mm-hmm. You go to talk to any psychiatrist or anybody who has half a brain, including most of the young generation, and you say, would you like to go to Sudan? Would you like to go to Gaza? And they'd say, no, why? Because it's dangerous, right? And there's a natural sense of logic to why would you go to a dangerous place? So life lessons, really, when you've survived all those things, the 4 dozen wars and expeditions and whatever, it's kind of like, what did you learn from going to dangerous places? And I guess what I did is I learned to manage risk. And that's lesson number 1, is that you don't control the risk in your life. You can't control if a meteorite's coming from space or whether you have a heart attack or whatever, but you can mitigate the risk, right? If you are in a position of having to actively manage risk, assessing what might kill you or harm you or sicken you, then you get used to the idea that you need to be healthy, that you need to survive. You need to come back with both mental and physical capabilities. And more importantly, you should come back with something productive. Since you're risking your life for this journey or this thing, why did you do it, right? There's a lot of books about people with drug addiction, adrenaline addiction, bad lifestyles. There's all kinds of names for them. I'm not that guy, right? So I'm a very happy person. I'm a very content person, and I'm a very stable person. And I still view going into a dangerous place as a manageable risk. So that's lesson number 1, is that you can manage risk and you can use that management skill in every aspect of your life.
Yeah, I wanted to touch on something. A lot of times you say that you're not a journalist, but I think a lot of people, you've written books, you've written a lot of articles, they view you as a journalist. So how did your career challenge the traditional definition of a journalist versus an adventurer?
Right, that's a good question. So today, I would take you fast forward to today, and everybody's a journalist. Yeah. If I have an iPhone, I take a picture of something, I upload it, somebody says, hey, can I use that in this NBC story, right? You see it all the time, car accidents, fires, disasters. So the idea of being a journalist has blurred, but there used to be a very specific definition of what a journalist was. So there was also a code of conduct, of ethics. And a journalist is someone who reports on a story or facts or activities, trying to maintain what they call balance. It's assuming there's 2 things. And then doesn't inject himself in the story and comes back with maybe a very calm, this thing happened at this time, it was 10 feet tall, and it was going 70 miles an hour, and 12 people were killed, blah, blah. And that's news. That's journalism. There was a career path for those people, and it usually meant you had to go to journalism school. You had to literally go train to be a journalist, and they taught you how to be a journalist. And then news organizations, which were large, profitable organizations, would hire people from that group of people that graduated from Columbia or whatever. I never set out to be that. I have no education. I graduated high school, and as you know, I lived in a car, I picked fruit, but I became a copywriter. And I seem to have a skill for writing copy, which I wouldn't call journalism by any means. I wouldn't even call it writing, but you're structuring words, right? You're trying to describe something or entice somebody or whatever. You're basically working with the English language, and you're allowed to be creative. So when I first did my expeditions, I didn't write anything down. I had no reason to. I took pictures because I was on an expedition. The first time I actually was like forced to write was the Camel Trophy, where I snuck in as a team member because I was a journalist. I would no such thing as a journalist, but I told them I would write things down and take pictures, and I think I did a pretty good job. Nice. And that was my first role as a journalist. My first time that I physically worked as a journalist, for, let's say CNN, right? I did the John Walker Lindh interview, and I was on the ground with what they call the horse soldiers, right? A special forces team. So I kind of knocked it out of the park on my first job.
But you didn't know that job was going to happen.
No,
it fell into your lap a little bit.
Me and I said yes. I would go over and cover the war.
Right.
I knew Afghanistan, and I was a writer, and I'd written a book. And CNN used to hand out my book to people. Like it was, everybody knew who I was because I was the guy that wrote the book, and it was like how to stay safe. So it made sense for me to go. And the point is that I became a journalist. Now, I did not like the business of journalism. Journalism is not. It's not like you got your little notepad and you're out there by yourself doing what you want. You work for an editor. There's a whole production team. They got stuff that's got to get on the air right now, got to get published, and your editor might completely change the story from what you reported on because that's not going to fly with whatever narrative they've chosen. So in the second war, like Iraq, again, media organizations, ABC, CNN, National Geographic, et cetera, Discovery, all wanted me to be a journalist. And at that time, there was a thing called rooftop journalism. Yeah. So you go into a war, and Iraq was unusual because you'd have to get permission from the military, which is bizarre, right? But you would have to get an embed. You would have to go get trained in hostile environment survival, which means they used to terrify these poor people by making them tear off their mask while they pumped tear gas into a vehicle or something. And then you would have to be under the control of whatever military unit you were assigned to. And if you wandered off, boom, you're gone. They just packed you up and sent you home. That to me is not journalism, right? That's basically PR. So I railed against that. I want my special forces friends invited me to come in before the war because they were running around doing secret stuff. And I said, sure. And it was ABC was like, no. You need to ask permission. So I wrote letters to the guy in charge. He said, he didn't know I was CC'd, but it said, this guy is going nowhere, like in capital letters, right? So, which made me happy, right?
Right. Rule breaker.
Yeah, exactly. And there were a group of people called unilaterals that were cruising around, and they actually got shot at, and some people died, right? I mean, they were treated almost as if they were the enemy. So it was a very unfortunate situation. So the question about journalism really becomes you now are constrained as a journalist. You're not freed as a journalist. You're actually in a box, and you have to conform with the narrative. And if you start writing a different narrative, they don't run that because it doesn't fit the thing they want to see. Plus, you have to be in a hotel because that's where all the broadcast equipment is. Yeah. And you have to stand in front of the lights, and you have to pitch. You have to do your story. So you set up your story, and then whatever you filmed that day or that week, whatever gets played as a story. Again, nothing wrong with that, but that's not my idea of journalism. Now, when I wrote my book, License to Kill, Hired Guns in the War on Terror, I think that's a journalistic endeavor, but again, it wasn't academic. It was me actually being on the ground with these mercenary groups, with the PMCs, with the security companies, getting shot at, running Route Irish, going to Equatorial Guinea. I mean, you name it. It was first person sort of, this is what it's like. A lot of very private.
Have you ever been called a gonzo journalist before?
I think some people use that word. There was a period, what they call the new journalism, there was a period in which the magazines like Esquire and Rolling Stone and Outside were promoting the idea like, this guy's crazy, he's going to go to Africa and he's going to go discover the source of the Nile, and, blah, 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 and he's going to be chased down the river by pygmies and blah, blah. He's gonzo, right? And there was also a lot of political reporting, and it bordered on fictional. If you go back and read, like Thomas Wolfe and read a lot of...
Hunter S. Thompson.
Hunter S. Thompson is the most famous guy. It was sort of a drug-induced fantasy. It wasn't really reporting. It was entertaining, that's for sure. Again, but I'm not that guy. Like when I'm driving through London with the guy who funds mercenaries in his black Bentley and he's telling me how much money each guy made, I'm taking very careful notes. And I'm challenging him on where did the money go, where did it come from. It's not dangerous, but it is when he finds out that I was like, you're not supposed to talk about that. And I'm like, well, you told me. And it's like, yeah, but you didn't tell me you were like writing things down. I wasn't writing things down. I was just listening.
Right.
So,
but you can remember it because you have
and people tell me all the time, like, you weren't supposed to write that down. I'm like, I didn't write it down. You told me. They said, but it was off the record. I'm like, no, it wasn't, because I was with you for like a month. It's like everything you do is on the record. So anyway, journalism is a dying profession. And I would like very much for someone to pay me $1 million to go write all the stories that I want, but that doesn't exist anymore.
Your dog your dog is dreaming right now. That's so cute. So everyone thinks you're crazy. You're this crazy guy that's going to go into these war zones and get yourself killed. But how did your willingness to enter war zones and interview warlords teach you about fear and risk in the pursuit of truth?
Well, my stock answer is that whenever I go into a war zone, there's always little old ladies there and children, right? So I don't think going into a war zone is an act of bravery. I think it's just an act of trying to find out what's going on. And they actively, I'm going to say the combatants usually actively try to keep journalists and people out of wars. And you've seen like in Israel and Gaza where they literally shoot journalists, right, and bomb them. Because they don't want people recording things that might be sympathetic to the enemy. So the control of the narrative is very important these days. The second thing is when you go into a war zone, there isn't just always danger. Like if you look at Ukraine, you're looking at missiles flying into people's apartment buildings. It's almost unspeakable that they would murder people in their bed, but that's war, right? Now there are front lines, there are trenches. There's like the 0 line, the 1 line, the 2 line, the 3 line, the 4 line, the 5 line, and you can go as far as you want. Like let's say the 0 line is contact. Right. You can go there. You can see people shooting at each other. Your risk goes up. You don't necessarily get better footage because they all got body cams and GoPros and whatever.
Now they do. Now they do. Yeah, it's changed.
Yeah, so you have to balance what risk level do I want to achieve versus what quality of story I get.
But what is the difference between reporting from afar and embedding yourself?
You have to do both. You have to do your research, so you have to basically be a little academic before you head out to a region. You have to read books, you have to read news stories, you have to call people, get as much information as you can about what is happening in recent terms. You have to go slowly as you get there. You have to meet friends, ask questions, say, I want to go here, I want to go there, this is the story I want to do. People will invariably help you because they want people to tell their story. Now, most people today are capable of filming stories, right? They don't need a journalist per se, but they want your platform. They want to be on a network or they want to be on BBC or whatever. So the closer you get to risk, it sort of comes down to like, do you need bang bang? Do you need the image of somebody shooting somebody? Well, for example, in Ukraine or Gaza, that stuff exists online. I could spend all day watching people get killed in Ukraine, right? In Russia. So the need to get that footage has lessened dramatically. Compared to when I was in Liberia or when I was in Sierra Leone, where there was nobody there, and the footage you were capturing was like, whoa, look at that. I didn't know that was happening.
Why can't people just watch that footage nowadays and come to their own conclusion? What is the benefit of having someone like you explain the situation?
Oh, that's an excellent question, because here's how it works. The act of killing somebody is not a story, right? It's a statistic. It can be gruesome, the person could be poisoned, they could die of old age, whatever, but we're immune to that. We've seen millions of people die. We have since 9/11, right? 3,000 people died live on TV, right? So my goal is to create a storyline, is to find a character or a person or a topic or something that pulls people through the story so they understand the impact of war. Not necessarily the fact that I'm there and look at me, woo, woo, woo. So you remember when I did Saving South Sudan, I took a child soldier back to Africa into the most gruesome conflict that he's been in, right? And that, to me, tells people more, right, about the impact of war. Me going there, I can leave. I don't have to stick around for 10 years or 5 years or fight in combat. So I think storytelling is still critical, and how you tell that story is even more critical. And again, what's missing is the platform for telling that story.
That leads me into my next question. How did your storytelling balance empathy with the realities of war and survival?
That's another good one. So there's a spectrum, right? There is the cold clinical view of war, and we've all seen Yahoo stories about look at me, I got my tattoos and my gun, and I'm in the war, and I'm fighting for freedom. And then you have sort of the NGO UN thing, like countless interviews with widows saying, what should I do, where should I go, what's to become of me, and these are just sort of, I don't think they penetrate the human emotional barrier these days, right? There's a lot of times I'll watch NPR and they'll have these pieces at the end, and I can't tell if they're in Sudan, Gaza, or Ukraine. It's kind of like the same interviews. They're always in the camps. It's always a female reporter, and it's always, look at how miserable life is for these people. And I feel like, okay, so what if I cared? What would I do? And they're really just justifying the budgets they have to maintain life support, health and medical assistance for these people. But again, the narrative has to change, and we see people having peace talks, right, in the White House, Alaska, whatever. There's no war there, right? It's always people sitting around, people are arguing about whether they wore a suit or not. They're like, give me this part of Ukraine, give me that, and it's like the obscenity of war should be displayed. Mm-hmm. Donald Trump's never been to a war. Like, if you put a dead or pieces of a dead baby at his foot and said, you could stop this by using the power of the American military, maybe he'll have an epiphany. I don't know, but he keeps thinking he's cutting deals, and it's like, no, that's not what war is. War is basically murdering people and destroying lives, destroying property, erasing people's existence. Again, before 9/11, I think wars had very little impact. They were kind of esoteric. People didn't pay attention. 9/11, it was the opposite. We got oppressed with war. It was like in the news every single day, right? And when we went into Iraq, it was like, I can't even keep track of how many stories there were about America at war. And then when we pulled out of Afghanistan, there was like this, and it just was quiet. Mm-hmm. There's nothing to talk about. No flags waving on Fox News and things like that. And I think people just wondered, like, wow, we just went through 20 years of being just sort of saturated with violence and this sort of mythology of heroes and victims and winning and losing and good and bad and terrorism and, freedom and all these jingoisms that we use. So you got to get past that, right? You got to get past the traditional cliches of war reporting. And I would like to think that I do that. I don't wear a thing that says press. I don't wear a little helmet and, blue and all this kind of stuff. I just dress like I dress. Yeah. And I hang out with people.
I've heard you talk about the idea of a collective PTSD after being bombarded with war for 20 years. How do you think that affected the American psyche? Okay,
so I was born in 1955. So from 1955 to when I was a teenager, all I can remember is Vietnam, right? I mean, I was not an American then, so I didn't have to go fight in Vietnam. But there were no wars. There was a magic period for almost 20, 30 years that there was really no war. Mm-hmm. There was sort of the Cold War, but that wasn't really a war. And if you're born, let's say 1995 onwards, maybe 1990, you were growing up at a time that suddenly you should be afraid. I think 9/11 did a lot more than just topple, buildings and scare people on 9/11. I think it made people think that there was this omnipresent threat because that was the message that I heard on television. Mm-hmm. That's the message I heard when I watched the president talk about why we're doing what we're doing overseas. It was always about bad guys, good guys, terrorism, defending the homeland. strangely enough, there weren't that many terrorist attacks. Like, there wasn't a whole bunch of 9/11s, right? So it was kind of a one-off, but we did create a culture of paranoia, a culture of fear, a culture of distrust. And I used to tell people, I'm going to Istanbul. Oh!
Yeah.
And I'm like, there's Muslims there. And I'm like, yeah.
Right.
Is it dangerous? And I'm like, I don't think so. Like, and I thought, oh, they've been conditioned to think that any country that has Muslims is a dangerous country and they hate Americans. And I'm like, no, that's not true. But where did you get that idea? And it's like 10 years of reinforcement that they're coming to kill us, right? And this is the thing that I don't understand is, I see it now, like with people like Lara Loomer and whatever. I see this just absolute hatred for people of a certain religion. I don't have that, right? But maybe some people assume that if you're part of a certain religion, you're a bad person, and if you're part of another religion, you're a good person. But I don't see that at all. So we got a narrative that we didn't necessarily want, but it just seeped through, which was be afraid, don't trust certain people. When you travel, watch out for like bombs exploding or assassinations or kidnapping or whatever. And I don't know, I think ISIS played to that, when they kidnapped journalists. I think the whole patriotism thing of the waving flags and, 2 tours Iraq, 12 tours, whatever, this idea that we were constantly going and fighting. The mythology, since I was ingrained in almost every war, was in Afghanistan, it was a peacekeeping mission. It went from a war to a peacekeeping mission, right? In Iraq, it was a stability mission. We were there to set up another government that wasn't Saddam Hussein's government and to create sort of systems and procedures that they could govern themselves with. But what we saw were the IEDs, the explosions, the deaths, whatever. So,
yeah. So I guess that's the difference between reporting from afar and reporting from within. And just to add to that.
So your question is, like difference between being there and being here, right? Depending on where you choose in Iraq or Afghanistan or Yemen or Somalia or whatever, things are perfectly peaceful or they can be very violent. It's up to your editor or whoever hires you to go there to decide what's the story about, right?
Yeah.
One of the things that I did notice was the idea that terrorists are everywhere, that you could go to Yemen or Afghanistan or whatever. And my thing is, look, when I take the taxi from LaGuardia, I meet more mujahideen or terrorists or whatever driving taxis in New York. People don't understand these groups, these groups that we used to support, that we now fight, et cetera, et cetera. So we don't have a very sophisticated understanding of good guy, bad guy, and we definitely don't have a good understanding of geography.
Right.
Like if you go to this place, nothing's going on. If you go to this place, it's not good, right? So The World's Most Dangerous Place is a book that attempts to say, go here, do this, but don't go here, or you can go there, but be aware of this or that. Just like when you come to the States, we have this new mythology now that everything's dangerous and people are dangerous, and we've shifted that terrorist thing to migrants. I mean, I'm a migrant, I came from Canada. My family founded America, but that's okay, 1627. I don't know where this fear of migrants came from. But it's suddenly there, right? Yeah. And I think what they're doing is they're kind of shifting that 9/11 war on terror thing to others, to migrants. Yeah. And I don't fear migrants at all, And now we've got Gestapo, state political police walking around tourist areas, and I'm thinking, why aren't they where it's dangerous? Like there's a disconnect, right? Right. And so all I'm saying is that we've traded one paranoia for another.
Right.
And we're exploiting that paranoia instead of defeating it. And journalism is supposed to defeat that. Journalism is supposed to say, oh, the government says this, but look, I'm here on the ground, and this is actually what's happening.
Right.
And we have a disconnect in Gaza where, the government of Israel says one thing, and people that report on it are like, no, that's not what's happening. Right. And it's like, well, they're terrorists. Why would you believe them? And now journalists are terrorists, right? So I'm not a pessimist. I'm just saying that these tropes, these narratives have been transferred from the war on terror and then turned against people that aren't terrorists or people you should fear.
Yeah, I think when you keep people in a state of fear like this, they become easier to control, and it's ultimately a quest for power.
You're harnessing that PTSD. Mm-hmm. So let's be clear about something. They do a lot of research to find buttons that they can push on people. If you're not sophisticated about the world, if you haven't been to these places, and if you don't know the difference between a Shia and a Sunni, or in Lebanon and Yemen, I mean, you don't really care. You just know that bad people. That vocabulary, that terminology, those tropes, that narrative, all gets overlaid on who they want you to fear, and then they feed imagery and ideas to justify that, right?
Yeah.
Statistically, it's not true.
Yeah.
So we do have a collective PTSD. We do know that somewhere out there somebody's planning to kill us, even though whether it's true or not, we don't know. And that's because of 9/11. We now are being abused by people who want things from us to think that that same fear should be applied to people that have nothing to do with it.
Yeah. I think this is very important. I think that we should do a podcast on the idea of psychological operations and do a deep dive, because I know that you've studied it a lot.
Well, I'm an advertising guy. So here's what's fascinating about warfare and advertising or marketing. In warfare, you have to convince a young man and a population to go kill these people. Mm-hmm. It may look exactly like you. Like Ukrainian and Russians are not that different, right? Yes, they are if you're Ukrainian and there's a Russian, they're trying to kill you. But it's not like black and white. It's not like Islam versus, like Crusades, Islam versus Christianity. It's very similar Eastern European people, in which you could argue that Ukraine was the original Russia and that Russia's claims to Ukraine are backwards, blah, blah, blah. But anyway, you now have to create an environment in which you want them to be the enemy. And I, as an advertising guy, know that people are prone to narratives, to stories. Mm-hmm. And the reality, and this is something you'll learn, and everybody learns, is that facts don't matter. The storyline does. Because humans don't like reality. They don't like science. They don't like knowing the grim truth of you're born, you grow up, you get old, and you die. It's not a good story to tell.
Right.
So religion fills a lot of that need for storylines, heroic stories, hero's journey. That fills a lot of gaps in like meaning, like what's my life about? Items of success like sports, like where you create a culture in which you can go from here to there as the little guy and you can achieve greatness. Actors, they have this starving actor becomes multimillionaire.
Right.
Crypto.com kind of also fills that gap. And the reality is that we want to hear a story. So that story can be used against people, and you can create the bad guy who's actually a good guy. And you can create the bad guy as a good guy. And I don't know, when I watch news or when I read things or when I go on the internet, I see a literal battle like bullets, like each post on X or Twitter or Facebook is like a bullet being fired by somebody against somebody. And it's like this constant artillery drill as people try to convince other people who aren't listening, by the way, because once you've chosen a narrative, it's very difficult to get you to go, oh, I was wrong. I'm sorry. I'll delete all my posts and I'll change my mind, right? So we're at constant war with each other. And there's a danger in that because we start to assume that this world we live in agrees with us and that there's them and there's us, but it's not true at all. Mm-hmm. So anyway, yes, we need to spend like an hour just going through the tools of psychological warfare, psychological operations, how people can be rebooted and retrained to think completely differently than they were raised or brought up to, how cults work, how the media builds narratives, how people sometimes have a very difficult job of discerning truth versus fiction because they suspect that everything's fiction, that they're not getting the full story. Yeah. Today that we have the Epstein files, right? Right. As a journalist, as a researcher, someone who writes complicated books about complicated things, I treasure the idea of diving deeply into the past, reading stories that were published on the day the thing happened, and looking at other viewpoints and building data like dates, times, places, reading court transcripts, reading things that are real, that are actually done under oath, and coming up with a conclusion in which I feel comfortable in saying I don't know everything, but I feel pretty good about my perspective on this, right?
Yeah.
To me, I find the Jeffrey Epstein story fascinating, because you have two groups of people. You have the left and the right, both absolutely rabid about this scandal, both assuming that if you reveal it, it'll be the guys they hate in the dossier, right? Mm-hmm. In actual fact, Epstein was a liberal, a Democrat, and hung out with both left and right. I don't think he had any real discernment between political parties. He was a guy that hid people's money. You make a bunch of money, he looks at your taxes, looks at the way you handle your trust, creates some paperwork, you sign it, disappears offshore, right? That's what he did. Now, the young girls thing and the child rape and all that kind of stuff, this is in addition to that. This is not what he did to make money, right? Now, did he use it to reward people or to get I don't know, right? That's not my point. But right now, it's turned into something completely different. And it's now a weapon by both sides against each other, in which the actual thing that they're most obsessed about may not exist. Is there a videotape of Clinton, of Trump, of this and that doing something horrible? I don't think there is.
Right.
I think that stuff is kept, if it exists, is kept very quiet and very locked up, because when people need it, they'll use it. But you can't prove that nothing exists, right? So this is a fascinating battle of PR and sort of psyops.
Yeah, totally.
And this is where journalism helps to kind of scrape away all the hysteria and focus on what exactly exists, right?
Right. So I don't want to get too political about this, but I think a big difference too, possibly between the left and the right, is that the left was letting the DOJ handle it. So possibly they were being a little more objective in that sense. I could be wrong.
You said it. Handle it.
The Epstein case.
No, but I'm saying when you say it, it's not what the media is talking about today. It's not what social media is obsessed. They're obsessed with everything. It is everything.
But that's where I think journalism comes into play, right? Because I don't think a lot of people realize this, that one side is directly trying to affect the DOJ, where the other side may not have talked about it as much and kind of the DOJ is going to do what the DOJ is going to do. You're using one side.
So if you're in the media business, what do you want? You want clicks, you want likes, you want readers, you want heat, you want people constantly reading your stuff, and so that advertisers will pay more money to be exposed to those readers. That's what it's about. They don't care what you argue about. The core in this is actually sort of deep state and pedophilia. Very popular topics amongst the right? Yeah. The idea that there's a secret cabal of rich men and women who do terrible things in private to young children. I don't know why that's such an obsession in America.
We got to talk about this on the PSYOP episode, because this is what it is. I mean, we can get into the Pizzagate thing and how that's transformed into.
It's addictive to the media, because the more you write about it, the more readership you have. Therefore, the more advertising revenue you get. That's my point. So if you say to a journalist, go write a story about what this thing is. Remember you said it? I said, well, what is it? What are people talking about? They're being triggered by some deep fear that when they see a headline, bus driver caught in deep state pedophilia, click, it's just a thing, right? It used to be like pinup pictures in World War II, like Betty Grable posing, So it's addictive, and it's become, a meme that just people become obsessed with, and it can be weaponized.
It's been weaponized, yeah.
And it can be invented, and it suddenly turns into just a big mess of what am I watching? Cartoons, reality, history. Do I care? Why are we talking? This is why I think when we talk about being a journalist, if you write a really interesting story about a small struggling republic that's fighting for, nobody cares. If you can write about Epstein's girlfriends or victims, you'll get elevated in terms of your visibility.
Yeah.
So it's understandable that journalism isn't that fun, and it's all tabloid stuff, right? It's all like, ooh, did you see this? Did you see that? I saw a fascinating thing yesterday in which a guy that works in the film industry, I think it was John Favreau, was saying that Hollywood used to spend a bunch of money on a movie, and people would pay money and sit in the theater for 90 minutes and watch something, and they would either get their money back or not get their money back. But they controlled the whole production and distribution thing, and people expected a big deal, and they made money. Now, everything's everywhere. People will consume, I don't know, let's say it takes $400 million to make a Superman movie, and you watch 15 minutes of it because it's bootleg or the preview, and that's all you care about. There's no model anymore for content or media. If I want to watch the New York Times or read the New York Times, they're like, oh, I have to pay money. I can read somebody commenting on it on social media, and I'm good with that, right? Mm-hmm. I'm just saying, for example.
Okay.
So when I have to go to Syria, or I have to go to Yemen or South Africa or Sudan, it costs thousands of dollars. You know, I have to buy tickets, I have to get my equipment together, I have to buy insurance, I have to pay people to drive me around, I have to pay for gas and food, and then I have to come back and I have to spend time putting it all together, and then I have to present that to either a magazine or a newspaper or a television network or whatever, and I have to make my money back, and I have to make a profit because that's what I do, right? It costs, I don't know, between $10,000 and $30,000 to do adventurous stuff. And it takes easily a month to do it, and easily a month to just put it together. Mm-hmm. And that's 2 months of labor that somebody making a normal salary would make between $10,000 and $20,000 a month. So you're talking $50,000, $70,000 to do a thing, like a project. And you wonder why journalism is dead. Mm-hmm. It's just too expensive. And now that they've got all kinds of weird insurance requirements, armored cars, blah, 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 I don't even know why they bother covering wars, because it's just as easy to pick like a shaky cell phone video from the front lines than it is to send some poor guy with a degree there and camera.
Because you don't get to truth, and then anyone can steer the narrative. Now, one thing that you did that maybe people nowadays wouldn't be as familiar with is you would go directly and interview the warlords in the specific region you were going to. Why?
Well, my original idea was I don't know that much about the war and the culture and the origins of the conflict, so I will go talk to each side and they will explain to me why they're fighting. So I would go there. They would be amused that I wanted to hang out and go to the front lines and talk to them and argue, discuss. And then I began to realize, okay, so most of these people, it's not their money they're spending. They're spending somebody else's money. They're part of a bigger picture. So I have to kind of zoom back and say, okay, well, who's funding this warlord? Mm-hmm. How is he paying for that Toyota SUV? How's he paying for that rifle? Where'd that rifle come from? Why is it bent? Oh, it was airdropped. Who airdropped it? Oh, it came from where? In other words, you start learning things that you're not supposed to learn. So I developed, I think, a very sophisticated view of most of the wars on this planet, and which ones are legitimate, rebel uprisings, which ones are funded by outside nations. And now I think it's a little bit more obvious, with Wagner and all these mercenary groups where people go, oh yeah, that's Wagner, which doesn't exist anymore. But the point was that for a while there was very obvious that these groups were funded by the UAE, by Israel, by America, whatever. So the goal of sitting with the warlords and talking to them is that you get to ask really uncomfortable questions. And you get to understand very quickly by who they're meeting with and who's leaving and coming and going, who they're aligned with, who fixes their helicopters, how their salaries are paid, how much people get paid, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the benefit of doing that.
Were you ever fearful of your life when you were interviewing them?
No, because they wanted me there to document what they were doing. It's quite normal in some cases. In some cases, it's not normal at all. But they thought, oh, this guy's from Discovery, this guy's from National Geographic, this guy's from CNN. He's going to film us doing our thing. And people get a kick out of that. Even if you're a warlord, you're kind of like, yeah, look at me. I'm warlording, In 10 years, they won't be warlording anymore. But at the same time, they don't realize that, this guy knows about war. This guy knows how much things cost. And how many pounds did you ship? What kind of aircraft did you use? The pilot seems to be from Tajikistan. I know that guy because he's over here. Look at these people. And so then they kind of this guy's asking too many questions. So they tend to just give me the usual, we're fighting for our freedom and this and that. Masood was like that. I was at the airport with all these Iranian spies going down to visit Masood, and they had to juggle the helicopter rides so the Americans weren't next to the Iranians, and because they were getting money from a bunch of people. And so they balanced that, but they wouldn't address those things, right?
Remind people who Masood was.
Masood was a leader in Afghanistan in the north that was killed the day before 9/11. But I'm just saying that when you go into remote areas and you start asking people, who is that guy and what does he do and how does he get funded, they tell you. It's not really a secret. So going there, you learn a lot. And would someone mess you up? Yes, there are people who have asked too many questions about Russians, about certain spy operations that were either arrested or waylaid or kidnapped or whatever, but typically they don't want that publicity.
The publicity of
kidnapping. And killing
Right.
Although these days it's changing.
Okay, a very unconventional career path you took. What can entrepreneurs and creatives learn from your unconventional career path?
Well, I learned that when you start from nothing, anything you do is better than not doing something. So forward motion, thinking, planning. And the second thing is, from marketing, I learned that a lot of times people will tell you what you need to know. If you ask questions, how do I do this? How do I get there? If I built a product, how much would you pay for it? I mean, these are the basics of research, right? But these are very simple questions that people learn instinctively in third world countries, in developing nations. You go to a marketplace in Africa, and you wonder, how do all these people know to come here and bring this much stuff, and how will they know they sell it? Well, they know because they're in the business of doing it, right? So if I'm trying to make a product, I've got to ask people, what do you like about a product? What should be in it? What shouldn't be in it? What color do you like? How much money should it cost? And then I have to build a business around that. Now, I've built businesses for people with that very simple idea. Like Upper Deck Company was a trading card company. And they had no idea how to create a company in a very restrictive marketplace where you had to get licenses from baseball and all these people. And I came up with the idea of pre-selling it, just like I used to do condos in Florida. You basically do the brochure, you do as if it existed. You go get not deposits, but you get promises of deposits. You test out the pricing, and then you see how many you sell. And then you take that to the bank, and then you build the condo. So in the baseball card industry, it was basically build the product so that people can touch it, offer them how many cases would you buy, get them to fill out an order, and then take that to baseball and to the Players League and say, you want to burn this check? Yeah. This is over $1 million worth of pre-orders. You tell me if you want me to tear it up or you want to cash it. And they're like, let me think about that. Now, the other thing was learning the little details, which was that collectability in baseball cards. Now this, the war guy's talking about baseball cards, but you can Google the story of Upper Deck. But I came up with a marketing plan that was absolutely dead nuts on. I predicted how much money they would make. I predicted their profit margin, which was 65%, and that they would make over $160 million in 3 years. And the reason I did that is that instead of running at 100% of estimates, I ran it at 80% of estimates, which means that 20% of the market would be unfulfilled. So 100% of the people said, yes, I will buy your product. If you give it to me, I will pay you money. I then shorted that by 20%, which drove them insane. So that created the effect of a shortage, and it made people go, I better buy this as fast as I can. So it drove the secondary market. So the price of the product rose in the secondary market. This is actually kind of similar to crypto these days, right?
Yeah.
But anyway, what happened was that the founder, who was a very nice guy, Paul Sumner, was actually pushed out by the accountant, Richard McWilliam. And Richard McWilliam was a strange man. I'll just say that, strange man. But he would look at the numbers and he'd say, wait, we have error cards that Robert makes. So Robert spells something wrong when he produces a card. That card's worth $60. Why don't we just print that one? I'm like, no. You have an unwritten contract with collectors and customers not to do that.
Right.
Because that's their joy of finding the error cards, of which ones is less than the other ones. And so he literally, without anybody's knowledge, went to the print manager and said, I want you to reprint these cards, all the error cards, all the collectible cards. And he began selling them. And we're talking about a box of error cards instead of and he was making a lot of money doing that. And when the industry, and by the way, I left. I had wanted nothing to do with it. When everybody found out that this is what this guy was doing, there's no law against that, by the way.
Yeah.
Because it's trading cards. Who cares, right?
But this is known as the junk wax era?
I don't know. I'm not a trading card guy.
This is when they started opening. I think this is the junk wax era.
So 89.
He's tanking the market because
I did Upper Deck like 89, 90, 91, and then I was out. I was done.
Yeah.
But the point was that it was an unwritten law. It's like being married, It's like you don't sign a contract, but you're not supposed to do certain things. So anyway, and then I thought to myself, like, this is kind of the difference between Putin and Ukraine, right? It's like certain things are worth more and you can steal them and nobody stops you. And like, this is what warfare is today. It's like the crypto business where, like, well, if people are dumb enough to buy shitcoin, I'll sell it to them. If they want to play that game and I make billions of dollars out of nothing and then it folds. So we are in a world where there aren't that many rules anymore. And I'm just old-fashioned, thinking that, well, there's, if you play by the rules, things will be fine. If you don't play by the rules, you'll get in trouble. Well, it's kind of the reverse now. If you can cheat, lie, and steal, there's still enough gullible people that you can fleece that listen to the whole thing about, well, there's only so much crypto and blockchain, and there's no way you could lose money because da-da-da-da, and it's like...
But this is how bubbles are created. And then there's a crash.
But this is how wars are created now. Yesterday I just saw Donald Trump talking to the president of a country that was invaded by Russia and being asked to hand over like the most lucrative parts of the country to have peace. And it's like, but he'll just keep going, right? Like, he's been doing it since I was in Chechnya, in 1999 when Putin's first war happened. And it was the same thing. They cut a deal after the first war and he said, nah, I'm coming back again. So none of this history is woven into any of these discussions, right? So anyway, being a journalist and an entrepreneur are the same thing sometimes, because you're doing research, you're trying to figure out how things work. You don't necessarily make money off the things you learn as a journalist, but as an entrepreneur, I made money doing ground networks,
right,
gathering information and publishing it in Somalia, Afghanistan, Iraq. So maybe they cross over, I don't know.
So if there's one lasting lesson from your life's work that you hope others carry forward, what would that be?
Always go out of the bubble, right? Like we live in a silo. We live in a media silo in which things we can read, see, touch, whatever, are reality. I think it's extremely healthy to go kill the lion. The ritual you go through as a teenager in Africa, where they just kick you out, and you leave the village, and you're out in the dark and out in the savannah. You got your spear, and that's it. And you're like, I got to kill a lion. I have no idea how to do this. And what if the lion eats me? And blah blah blah. And then you start realizing, like, well, it's not that scary. And that's my point: is that this coming of age, or this sort of transition from child to man, is where you have to go out without any knowledge, without any preconceptions, without any training, and you have to figure stuff out. And you find, like, I can do this. And people will help me. And if I'm a genuine person, they're not going to fleece me or, take my stuff and throw me in a hole. I think if you do that one thing, just go outside your comfort zone, go to a place that maybe you've always wanted to go to but know nothing about. You don't speak the language, you don't understand the culture. And go there and just learn. You'll respect your survival tools. That humans are built to survive, to learn, to adapt. And that adapting and learning is the key to success. Not being fixed in a viewpoint, not being fixed in an ideology. And so when bad things happen, you can sit down and go, okay, shift up. How do I handle this? And like in special forces, they teach you, just fix the thing that's in front of you. Like don't try to fix the whole world and everything around you. Deal with the thing in front of you. If something's on fire here, put that fire out and then worry about the next fire, right? Don't come up with a plan to put all the fires out. So those two things are the same thing, right?
Right.
It's go where you're not comfortable or where you've always wanted to go, and just deal with things. As you want to eat, learn how to say chicken or comida, or ask a guy, how do I say, where can I eat breakfast? Where is the best breakfast? Oh, I'll take you. Come on. When you sit, suddenly it's like, this is cool.
Yeah.
This is the joy of travel, right?
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be dangerous. It doesn't have to be exotic. But if you do that one thing in your life, you'll always be happy.
Awesome. That's good advice.
Well,
all right.
Somebody will do it and say, I did that and I got robbed.
Shit happens.
Well,
all right.
Again, danger is just, it's not absolute, right? It's your perception of danger. So I've always been very comfortable, like jumping a train, like in Tajikistan, or getting on the back of a truck in Sudan, or I used to hitchhike across the country, back and forth.
Yeah.
People are like, whoa, you used to hitchhike? Yeah, I used to go from Vancouver to Central America. I used to go from Miami to Vancouver. They're just looking at me like, and you're still alive? And it's like, yeah, most people are bored driving and they see some guy and they pull over and like, did they try to rob him? Like, no, never. I never had any problems like that.
Right.
A lot of great stories. The one guy, his wife died and he was in this big old car, big yellow, I don't know if it was a Cadillac or a Buick or something like that. And he was in his 80s and he couldn't drive very well because he'd kind of like weave to one side and everything. And so I said, well, let me drive. And I was like 18 or 19 or something like that. I said, let me drive. And so he started telling me his life story. And he said he's just lonely. And he decided to get in his car and drive. And he had nowhere to go. And maybe he'd go see his daughter on the West Coast or something like that. It was just fucking awesome with this. And this old guy was having so much fun telling me his life story. And like stuff like that you can't recreate, right? It's just it's one of my life experiences.
Yeah.
So
I wonder if those experiences influenced what you did later. I'm sure.
It's what I do all the time. I mean, I'm a natural born listener. Like I will sit next to someone on the plane, and I'll just start talking to them, and they'll start talking to me, and I ask certain questions, right? Like I'm interested in who they are and how they got here, blah blah blah, and not a lot of people ask people intelligent questions. It's kind of like social patter, like oh that's nice, So you have 5 hours on a plane, you can learn a lot of things,
right?
About people, and you meet a lot of interesting people. And when you travel, of course, to developing countries and whatever, everybody's your best new friend. And so anyway, it's just get outside your comfort level and get outside your comfort zone, I guess is the right word, and just deal with one thing at a time. One thing at a time. You need to eat. You need to sleep. Go find a place to sleep. If you want to buy a bus ticket, figure out where you want to go. But don't do like the whole day planner, internet, like how am I going to do this and which site should I see? Because if you overcomplicate travel, it's no fun.
Yeah.
It's definitely no fun. So
you lose the mystique and the magic.
Yep, that's it.
All right. We got this one in the can. Thanks, Robert.
Let's cut it.
Here we go. Oh, yeah, you do it.